She hung up before I could say another word. I stood in my kitchen. The kitchen I'd remodeled with my own hands in 1987, the one with the crack in the tile by the refrigerator that I'd always meant to fix but never did, and I listened to the silence on the other end of the line. My daughter had just told me she'd signed the papers on my house. My house, the one I'd paid off in full 11 years ago, the one where her mother and I had raised her, where we'd buried a dog in the backyard, where I still kept her third-grade drawings in a folder in the hall closet. "We're done here, Dad," she'd said. "The buyers take possession in 30 days. You need to find somewhere to go." Then nothing. A deadline. I set the phone down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands aren't quite steady. I was 64 years old. I had worked 31 years as a structural engineer for a firm in Cincinnati. I had never missed a mortgage payment. I had never asked anyone for a single thing I didn't earn first. And my daughter, my only child, had just sold my home out from under me. Let me back up, because the story doesn't start there. It starts about 2 years before that phone call, right around the time she married him. His name was Brett. I'll say this much for Brett. He was good-looking in the way that certain men are good-looking. The kind of looks that do most of the work in a room so they never have to develop anything else. He sold something in tech. I could never quite follow what. Software licensing, maybe. He drove a leased BMW and wore shoes that cost more than my first car payment. My daughter Lena had met him at some rooftop event in Columbus, and by the time she called to tell me about him, they'd already been together 4 months. I tried. I genuinely tried to like the man. The first Thanksgiving after they got together, I drove up to Columbus and cooked a full meal in their apartment. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potato casserole, the cranberry sauce Lena had always asked me to make every year since she was small. Brett arrived 40 minutes late, pecked Lena on the cheek, and spent most of dinner on his phone. At one point he looked up and said, "This is good, Bob." "My name is not Bob. It's never been Bob. It's Walter. No, wait. My name is not in that file. But let me choose carefully. My name is Gene. Short for Eugene. No, that one's taken. My name is Roland. That's what people called me. My father called me Rolly until I was about 12 and told him I hated it. After that he called me Rolly until the day he died, which tells you something about fathers and sons. I let the Bob go. I told myself it was nerves. First meeting, new girlfriend's father. He was probably nervous. He called me Bob 3 more times that weekend. After they got engaged, things shifted in ways I couldn't quite articulate at the time, but understood later. Lena started calling less. When she did call, there was a quality to her voice, careful, like she was reading from something. She'd ask how I was doing, wait the appropriate amount of time while I answered, then steer toward whatever the real reason for the call was. Usually it was money, not large amounts, not at first. A few hundred here. A quick loan for a car repair. I gave it without hesitation because she was my daughter and that's what you do. Then it was larger. $3,000 for a deposit on a new apartment when they moved to a better part of Columbus. $5,000 to help with the gap between Brett's jobs. He'd left one tech company and was transitioning, which, as far as I could tell, meant he was playing golf in Hilliard while my daughter went to work every morning. I gave it. Every time. My wife, Carol, had passed 4 years earlier. Pancreatic cancer, 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After she died, the house felt enormous and quiet in a way I hadn't expected. I thought I knew what grief was. I didn't. Grief when you're young is a storm. Grief when you're 60 is the weather just permanently changing. You wake up every morning and it's a little colder than you remember it being. Lena was the only family I had left. A brother in Flagstaff I hadn't spoken to in years. A few cousins I knew only from Christmas cards. When she'd call, I'd feel something loosen in my chest, Even if the call was really about money, even if it was brief, she was still my daughter. And I loved her in that helpless, unconditional way that parents love children. The way that doesn't require the child to do anything in particular to maintain it. Which is, I think, exactly how people like Brett find their footholds. About 14 months before the phone call, Lena came down to Cincinnati alone. Brett had a golf thing, she said. We sat on the back porch, the same porch where she'd done homework every September afternoon as a kid. And she told me that they were thinking about buying a house of their own. Something in the Dublin area, north of Columbus. A nice neighborhood. Good schools, she said, though they didn't have kids yet and hadn't discussed it, at least not with me. She said they were short on the down payment. The house she described was $740,000. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that a man who spent 4 months not working while his girlfriend paid their rent had no business buying a $740,000 house. Instead, I asked her how much they needed. Whatever you can do, Dad, she said. We're not asking you to cover it all. They were asking me to cover $40,000. I had money saved. Not a fortune, but the working man's savings. A 401k I'd been contributing to since my 30s, some equity in the house, a modest investment account I'd started after Carol's life insurance came through. Enough to live on quietly, not enough to give away in large chunks, and not feel it. I told her I'd think about it. She left the next morning before I was up. There was a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Thanks for everything, Dad. Love you." It was in her handwriting, but it didn't sound like her. I didn't give her the $40,000. That, I think, was when things started turning. The calls got shorter. Then they stopped being calls and became texts. Then the texts became infrequent. I'd send something, a photo of the yard, a note that I'd seen something on TV she used to love, a question about how she was doing, and get back a thumbs up emoji or a one-liner. Sometimes nothing. I told myself she was busy. Young people are busy. Married people are busy. I had been busy at her age, and I hadn't called my own father enough. I believe that right up until the afternoon, I came home from a doctor's appointment and found a car I didn't recognize in my driveway. It was a rental. A white Nissan Altima with Ohio plates. Lena was standing at my front door with a manila envelope, and Brett was leaning against the car with his arms crossed and his sunglasses on, even though it was November and overcast. I hadn't seen her in 8 months. She hugged me. It was a real hug. She held on for a second, and I felt it, that specific feeling of holding your child, no matter how old they are. Then she pulled back and handed me the envelope. "Brett and I have been talking," she said, "about your situation." "My situation," I repeated. "Dad, you're 63. You're alone in this big house. The maintenance must be, I manage fine. We think it might make more sense for you to move into something smaller. A condo, maybe. Or there are some really nice independent living communities." I looked over her shoulder at Brett. He was checking his phone. "And the house," I said. She looked at the envelope in my hands. "We could list it, split whatever equity there is after." "Costs. You'd have money to set yourself up somewhere comfortable. And Brett knows a broker who, get off my property," I said. Not loudly. I didn't raise my voice. I said it the same way I'd have said, "Hand me that wrench," or "Close the door." Flat and clear. Lena looked stricken. Brett pushed off the car and took a step forward. "Sir, you're just trying to sell my house," I said. "And she's going to have to do that without my cooperation, which means it's not going to happen. So I'd appreciate it if you'd both leave now." They left. Lena didn't look back. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I did not eat dinner that night. I sat there in the dark and I thought about Carol, about how she would have handled this, whether she would have softened it somehow, found a way to keep the bridge from burning completely. Carol was the peacemaker. I was the one who built things and expected them to hold. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. His name is Philip. No, that's taken. His name is Stuart. I'd used Stuart for routine things over the years. A will, a property deed, when I bought the house outright, a small business matter years ago. Stuart is not flashy. He works out of a quiet office in Hyde Park, and he charges fair rates, and he has never once told me what I wanted to hear just because I wanted to hear it. That's why I've kept him for 20 years. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is a habit I've always respected in a person. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Roland, has Lena ever had power of attorney over anything of yours?" "No," I said. "Joint access to any accounts? Co-signature on any documents?" "No." "Nothing." Another pause. "Do you still have the deed to the house?" "Locked box in my bedroom closet. Original and a copy." "Okay," he said. "Here's what I want you to do." What Stuart explained, carefully and without drama, was that I needed to move quickly, not because anything had happened yet, nothing had, legally, but because people who come to your door with manila envelopes and a rental car have usually already been somewhere before they came to you. He recommended I contact a title company immediately to run a search on my property and confirm there were no unauthorized liens or filings. He recommended I set up a real estate trust with him as the trustee, a structure that would make any transfer of the property legally impossible without Stuart's direct involvement and sign-off. He also recommended I start documenting everything, every call, every text, every visit. I didn't sleep much that night, but I didn't panic either. I've been an engineer for 3 decades. Problems have structures. Once you understand the structure, you can work on it. The next 6 weeks were quiet. No calls from Lena. No texts. I did the things Stuart told me to do. I had the title search run. Clean. No filings. I signed the trust documents in Stuart's office on a Tuesday morning, then went to a diner nearby and had eggs and toast and coffee, and felt something settle in me that had been unsettled for weeks. Then, on a Thursday evening in late January, my phone rang. Lena's voice was different this time. Controlled, almost businesslike, with something underneath it that I could only describe as rehearsed satisfaction. "I want you to know we've found a buyer," she said. "We're leaving tomorrow. The paperwork is done. I've sold your beach house, Dad." I almost laughed. Not a happy laugh. The laugh that comes when something is so far beyond what you expected that your brain doesn't know what else to do with it. "You sold my house," I said. "The closing is scheduled. You have 30 days to vacate. I'm sorry it came to this, but you gave us no choice." I let the silence sit for a moment. Outside my window a car went by, headlights sweeping across the ceiling. I could hear her breathing. "Lena," I said, "you might want to call whatever broker you use before you start counting that money." "What are you talking about?" I hung up. I know, in hindsight that might have been petty. But I'd been awake at 3 in the morning for 6 weeks, thinking about my daughter standing in my driveway with a manila envelope and her husband checking his phone. I was allowed one small petty moment. The next morning I called Stuart. He had already been in contact with the title company. Whatever documents Lena and Brett had filed, and they had filed documents, a fraudulent deeds transfer using what turned out to be a forged notarization had hit a wall the moment they reached the trust structure. You cannot transfer property out of a properly recorded trust without the trustee's authorization. Stuart had not authorized anything. The title company flagged it immediately. By noon, Stuart had been in contact with the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office. I want to be precise here, because I know how these things sound, and I don't want to overstate it. I didn't know exactly what would happen or when. Stuart walked me through it honestly. This kind of case takes time. There are no guarantees. The outcome depends on evidence and process. What I did know was that the structure was in place, the documentation was clean, and the fraud was now a matter of record. What happened in the weeks that followed came in pieces. A detective from the Financial Crimes Unit contacted me for a statement. I gave it, all of it, with dates and call logs and the texts I'd saved and the original deed. Stuart sat with me through the whole meeting. The detective was a quiet woman named, I'll call her by her title. The detective was thorough. She asked good questions. She didn't promise anything, but she wrote everything down. Brett, it turned out, had done this before. Not to a parent, or at least, not that came up in my case, but he had a history with property fraud in another state, a matter that had been settled civilly without charges. Stuart found out through a colleague. The moment that information was in the hands of the prosecutor's office, the case changed shape. Lena called me twice during this period. I didn't answer the first call. The second time, I picked up. She was crying. Real crying, not the perform kind. I could tell the difference. I'd known this woman her whole life. "Dad, I didn't know all of it," she said. "I didn't know he'd filed fake documents. He told me it was a gray area, that since you weren't of sound—" She stopped. "He told you I wasn't of sound mind," I said. Silence. "That's what he used," I said. "That was his angle. Your father's losing it. Let's get ahead of this before he gives the house to some charity or a con artist gets to him first. Am I close?" She didn't answer. But she didn't deny it either. I want to tell you that was the moment I stopped being angry. It wasn't. Anger doesn't work like a switch. But it was the moment I started to understand that Lena was both a person who had done something deeply wrong and a person who had been manipulated by someone who was very good at finding the pressure points in other people's lives. That doesn't excuse it. It doesn't undo the 8 months of silence, the envelope on the porch, the phone call where she told me to vacate my own home. Nothing undoes those things, but it does complicate them. And I've spent enough years on this earth to know that complicated things rarely fit cleanly into the stories we want to tell about them. Brett was charged with 1 count of felony real estate fraud and 1 count of forgery. He bonded out within 24 hours. He had means, but the charges stood, and his attorney, according to Stuart's contact, was not optimistic. The civil exposure alone was significant. Lena was not charged. The prosecutor determined she didn't have sufficient knowledge of the specific fraudulent acts, though she was interviewed multiple times. She moved out of their Dublin house, back into a rental in Columbus, I was told by a cousin who'd heard from someone. I didn't ask for details. I am still in my house in Cincinnati. The crack in the tile by the refrigerator is still there. I keep meaning to fix it. Last October, about 7 months after all of this, I drove up to Columbus on a Saturday. Not to see Lena. I hadn't told her I was coming. I just needed to drive. When you've worked in an office for 30 years, and then suddenly you have a thing like this happen to you, you rediscover the value of just moving through space without a destination. I ended up in a park near where Lena's apartment is. Not deliberately, or at least not consciously. I sat on a bench near a pond and watched a couple of kids feeding ducks, and I thought about Carol, like I still do, like I probably always will. I thought about what she'd say. She wouldn't say "I told you so." That wasn't her way. She might put her hand on my arm and say, "You did right, Rolly." She always called me that too, after I'd specifically asked her not to. I never really minded. I drove home the long way, stopped for coffee in Dayton. Lana texted me in November, a short text, just that she hoped I was doing well, that she was sorry, that she was in therapy now, and the therapist had suggested reaching out. I sat with the text for a few days before I wrote back. I told her I was glad she was getting help, I told her I wasn't ready to talk, but that I wasn't closing the door. I don't know what will happen with that. I genuinely don't. What I do know is this: my house is mine. My name is on the deed, Roland Mercer, the only name that's ever been on that deed. The name I put there when I paid off the last mortgage note in February of 2013 and took Carol out for a steak dinner to celebrate, and she ordered a cosmopolitan and raised her glass and said, "We built something, didn't we? We did. And no one is going to take it from me." I think about that crack in the tile sometimes, the one by the refrigerator that I never fixed. 30-something years it's been there, and every morning I walk past it and think, today maybe. And then I don't. Carol used to say it gave the kitchen character. I used to say it was just a thing I hadn't gotten around to. We were both probably right. What happened with Lena and Brett didn't come out of nowhere. Even if it felt that way when she called that Thursday night, looking back, I can trace every step. The shortened calls, the money requests that kept growing, the visit with the manila envelope, and I can see now that each thing I ignored or excused was a small door I left open. Not because I was foolish, because I loved her and I didn't want to believe what I was watching. That's a very human mistake. It doesn't make it less of a mistake. Brett was a man who understood how to use love against people. He found the places where Lena was uncertain about money, about her future, about whether her father would ever really approve of her choices, and he filled those spaces with his own version of reality. That's not an excuse for what she did. She made choices, adult choices, with real consequences. But I've lived long enough to know that when someone tells you your father is losing his mind and needs to be managed, and you want badly enough to believe it, you can talk yourself into almost anything. What kept me whole through all of it wasn't anger, though I had that. It wasn't even the trust structure Stuart helped me set up, though that saved everything practically. It was something quieter than either of those things. It was the habit, built over 30 years of engineering work, of looking at a problem clearly, without flinching, and then doing the next right thing. Not the dramatic thing, not the revenge thing, the next right thing. I've been turning that over lately, what it actually takes to get through something like this without losing yourself. I think it comes down to 3 things that you either build in yourself over a lifetime or you don't. The first is knowing right from wrong and not negotiating with yourself when it matters, holding that line even when the person crossing it is someone you love. The second is thinking clearly when everything in you wants to react, being able to slow down, call Stuart, run the title search, document the text rather than just throw the phone across the room. And the third, maybe the hardest, is just staying in it, not giving up the house, not giving up on yourself, not giving up on Lena entirely even after everything she put me through. I'm not a saint. I hung up on her that Thursday night for the satisfaction of it. I'm fine with that. She texted me in November. I haven't called her back yet. I might. I haven't decided. What I know is this: the house is mine. The deed says Roland Mercer. It said that the day Carol and I celebrated paying it off, and it says that now, and some things are simply not for other people to take.